Hi everyone. Today we're going to do something different. I'm calling it a flip-through. So we have this book here that I'm going to show to you. And we're just going to look at what is in it, what it's about. So as you can see, this is called the Quilter's Recipe Book. And this is for people who want to quilt and learn how to quilt. And I'm going to put all the information on the screen so that you can find it at your local library or thrift store, secondhand store. So as you can see, we have the contents page, and it's going to tell us how to make all these different blocks for quilting. Here we have the introduction. And this is going to be the layout of the pages, which we will get to. So this has a little area where it tells you about the different equipment that is needed when you want to start quilting. I don't think you need all of this, but it's good to have. I do have all of this just because I was an art major in school and I got my degree in art. So I do have a lot of this already. You do not need all of this though. But it shows you that you need drawing papers, graph papers, different types of papers for creating a design, markers and pencils to color in your design. There are different pencils and pins that you can use, different writing instruments like the compass and the protractor and the ruler here. This does give you a couple of other things that you wouldn't normally have, which is this here, which is a reducing glass. So the reducing glass, which is this little part here, shows you, let's see, it says right here, shows how fabrics will look from a distance. You can get the same effect by looking through the wrong end of a pair of binoculars. Interesting. 12, a multi-image lens, a perspex acrylic sheet through which you can see how one block will look when multiplied. So I'm guessing that's like a bug eye kaleidoscope effect. 13 is a viewfinder, a red or green lens that eliminates color but reveals the relative dark light tonal value of the fabrics. The red lens is not effective with red fabrics. The green lens is not effective with green fabrics. I have never used any of this before when making a quilt or even in art, but those might be handy. Over here, it tells you about all the different templates, rulers, things you can use to help you make a quilt. Also, things you will need for sewing. So you'll need marking pencils for sewing, different types of needles, threads, some things you might have already if you already sew. Once again, you do not need everything, but having many different things does come in handy. Thimbles, scissors, more threads. It tells you, I think, about the different types of threads also. Embroidery loops. Of course, a sewing machine makes it a lot easier, but you can't sew by hand. This page is telling us about materials, the different types of fabric that you could use. Most people use cotton, 100% cotton, for their quilts. So this page tells us the different materials that you can use. There's also battings, different types of battings. Everything is personal preference though. It really is. Even the colors. Some people like very bright colors. Some people like neutrals. Some people like many different colors. And here it's talking about designing with fabric. So what fabrics you want to choose for the design that you're going to make. It talks about solids, patterns, novelty fabrics, fussy cutting. Fussy cutting is actually just cutting around a certain pattern or picture that you like to highlight that part of the fabric. Borders, sashings, and trial and error. When making a quilt or with any sewing or craft, there's always going to be trial and error. You might mess up, you might not make it right, and that's okay. This part here is telling us how to draft blocks and make templates. Wow, this is a lot for a beginner. Most patterns that we see already are drafted for us, and it just tells us how to make it. You know, cut this a certain measurement and cut this a certain measurement out of a certain fabric and then just sew it together. This one is actually telling us what the different grid sizes are for the preferable patches that you want, the blocks that you want to make. It tells you how to draft it up and make it. How to make geometric blocks. How to enlarge it with a photocopier. Making non-geometric blocks. This is usually for applique, which is just sewing on top of another fabric, sewing a fabric on top of a fabric. How to make your templates. So it looks like here, you make your templates on a graph piece of paper, then you cut it out and put it on either cardstock or construction paper with your seam allowance. So this yellow part is the seam allowance, it looks like. And then you would use these blocks to cut out your fabric. Shows us how to cut the fabric, how to use a rotary cutter. This is a very old book because our rotary cutters don't really look like that anymore. Some of them look ergonomic, some of them look very different than that. Tells you how to use a ruler to line everything up, how to piece it, your machine stitching, setting in the patches. We're gonna go a little bit faster here because I'm not actually doing any of this. I'm just showing you what it shows you how to do. How to make your block, how to press it. The fun part, I think, is where it actually shows us the different quilts we can make out of the different blocks. This one's the applique, where you cut out a piece and sew it onto another fabric. This one is showing us settings and layouts of a quilt. So you could have one block that repeats over and over. You could have one block with one solid in between. This one has sashings, which is the orange crisscross parts. Sashings and posts are cornerstones. So that's the orange and then the little squares in the middle. And this is setting on point and edge to edge. So if it looks a little bit different, let's take a look at that up close. So this one is just a straight block. This one is set in a diamond. And of course, a diamond with sashings, a diamond with sashings and posts or cornerstones. alternating with plain on the outside. So there are many different variations for a quilt. You do not have to make a quilt a certain way. You can make it your own. If you think sashings are beautiful, if you don't like sashings, that's okay. There's also different types of borders. Plain border, multiple borders, borders with corner posts, multiple corner posts, mitered corners, which you all should know by now I am very bad at. Pieced borders, so these borders have patchwork in the borders. And then the quilting part of a quilted quilt is the sewing. So this shows us different types of quilting we could do. Stitch in the ditch is a very plain stitch. I believe I showed that to you in the placemat video. There's outline, echo, which just uses the same shape that's on there. Stipple quilting, which is kind of a little random wiggle all over. You could also do medallion designs, border patterns, background designs, quilting techniques. So this one's showing that you don't have to think of it yourself. You could draw it onto your fabric and quilt along the drawn design. This one's showing how to baste, hand quilting. So this is hand quilting on a hoop, straight and machine quilting. So you could do it if your machine is able to quilt. You need a special foot for it. Usually you use a walking foot, which is a special foot that helps move the presser foot along the big thick fabric, because you're trying to go through the top fabric, the middle batting, which is the fluffy part, and then the back fabric. So having a quilting foot, walking foot is good for that. This one here has another special type of foot, which just goes up and down, and your hands, you disengage the feeder dogs, and then your hands move it around. So the machine isn't feeding it, your hands are moving it around and around. Or you could tie a quilt, which is, I think, the easiest and fastest for me. And that's just using embroidery floss or yarn to tie the back through to the front. Okay, and here's borders, attaching your border. You could also, if you're going to display it, you can put a little pocket on the back to display it. Okay, here is the meat and potatoes of this. We have all the blocks that are going to be in this book. I'm not going to go through all of it. This is just a flip through. So I'm actually just showing you very quickly what this book has to offer. So it shows us all the different types of blocks that we can make in this book. Now let's go to the first one, the woven patchwork. So it shows us here that the skill level should be very easy. Our strips are basically going to look like this. We're going to need a dark, a medium light, a medium dark, and a light fabric. It doesn't actually give us cutting instructions. It tells us that you're going to need to draft the block on a 7x7 grid and make the template. So it does not give any sizes at all. So if you want this to be 2 inches by 7 inches, if you want it to be 1 inch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 1 inch by 7 inches. You can. You'll just have to make sure it's 1.5 inches by 7.5 inches because you need a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But that was all told to us back at the beginning of the book where it showed us how to draft a template. Then tells us we have to cut these fabrics, how to sew them, and these are the different variations of the patterns. This is that on point where instead of having it just side by side, you angle it into a diamond shape. This next one we can see is a skill level of 2, so I guess intermediate. These are the template shapes that you're going to need. Tells us we need a dark fabric, a medium fabric, a light fabric. We're going to be using a 4x4 grid to make the templates. And then how to cut these. So I'm going to talk a little bit and walk through these. It doesn't really tell us how to stitch or show us exactly how we're supposed to put it together. This one here says make the patches, stitch them together. Well, you're going to have to know how to make a Y seam. You're going to have to know, how to stitch these together. And that could be difficult for some people. I mean, this says easy, but some people might not be able to know how to do that. So even though this book looks amazing, I would say that this is not a beginner book. This is great for ideas and great to have in your arsenal of quilting books. But there could be an easier way to sew something. You might not need all these different shapes in order to make this square. For instance, I could say you just make strips in these colors maybe, and then cut them to your desired length. That might make that easier. These are half square triangles, which could be made an easier way than cutting out triangles first and then sewing the triangles together. So this is based all on templates. Take this pattern, cut it out, sew it to something else. But there could be an easier way to make it. Like such as this one here. I would probably, if I were to do this, I would make a half square triangle in the blue and black. But then I would just cut it, across. And then that way I just have these two instead of trying to cut 2 triangles. But that's just me. Some people do it differently. Some people joke that there's quilting police out there. And quilting police want you to do it a certain way and to sew a certain way. But, I mean, really, you're in your own house. You can sew however you want. You do not have to sew how everybody tells you how to sew. So if you like this template idea, go for it. If that makes your brain not hurt, then all for you. I have made some of these quilting blocks. Sometimes when you do a sampler quilt has different blocks on it. And it's usually good to do a sampler quilt as one of your first quilts because you learn different techniques and different ways of sewing things together. Okay, I'm gonna just go back Go through a little bit faster and faster. I like the variations on the side. I like seeing what can I do with this specific block. So it's this, but I can turn it into these. And I love that. And this one also has, if you can see down here, below this quilt, it gives a little blurb on it. So this one, this particular block, is called the Queen Charlotte's Crown. Queen Charlotte was the wife of England's George III and therefore the last Queen of America. Charlotte, North Carolina is named in her honor, and so is this block, although after 1770 it was renamed Indian Meadow. The center patches merge to form an interesting shape, so it is important to choose a striking fabric for them. So this one. The quilt is finished here with a plain border. And they have that along the bottom. So goose tracks. Let's see, let's read. Let me pull another one out. Locked star. What does this say about it? When repeated blocks are joined side by side, the effect is of a pieced star set between plain squares. Oh, you can see these. There you go. However, you can vary this effect by using fabrics in different colors on opposite sides of the center square, as shown in the variations opposite. You could also use a feature fabric for the center square. The quilt is finished with a border and corner posts. Basket of scraps, a box quilt, arrows, Dolly Madison star. Let's read this one. As wife of the 4th President of the United States, Dolly Madison was mistress of the White House for 16 years. She became known for her beauty and prowess as a hostess and for having a social conscience. The block is of a Virginian origin dating from the early 19th century, when it would have been pieced in red, white, and blue to signify the new republic. Here it is finished with a border with corner posts. So this block here, Dolly Madison's star. Now, of course, I don't know if the little blurbs and history we are getting at the bottom of these are real. I'm just reading what it says in the book, and I'm assuming that Arthur knows what they're talking about. I really like this one. This one looks difficult just because it has all of these little parts that have to be sewn together. There might be an easier way to do this though. But it looks beautiful, I like it. I'm actually doing one similar to this right now. Log cabins. Off-center log cabins. Look at all these different variations for this one. Drunkard's path. Orange peel. Suspension bridge, pin cushion, now these on the top you can see it says applique blocks. So these are actually made with applique. You have to center or find the center of your block, make a bias strip for the stem. So this is a sewn piece of fabric that is sewn directly onto the block. And then this is a different color fabric that is sewn directly onto the fabric. These are all applique blocks here in this section. And this is it. This is the resources and the index. Okay. Well, thank you for watching this flip through. And I hope you like this book. And if you do, go find it at a local thrift store. I got this one at my library. And all the information should be on the screen for you. Okay. Thank you. Bye.